I'm Marcel, and welcome to me screaming into the void, mostly about books. I have read through all 100 books by Biblio's 100 Best Women in Translation that was voted on by her subscribers in 2019. And I wanted to read all of them just because, well, to figure out what kind of books were we talking about in 2019 in regard to women in translation. So that are books written by someone in another language and then translated into English. I'm going to start with just giving some statistics. Some of them will be not surprising, and some of them at least surprised me. The first thing is that when it came to continents, I was not surprised to see that Europe dominated the list. So 59 of the 100 books were from a European country, one of them from a European territory. 18 of the books were from Asia, 5 were from Africa, and 18 were from the Americas. So I just smushed all of the Americas together. But that didn't really surprise me in one sense, because culture, especially on the internet, is very Eurocentric. But what did surprise me was why so many books were from Europe. Because I thought that maybe, especially France, would just dominate all of the books, because a lot of books are published in France. And yes, France has a lot of books on this list, but they have 15 books on the list, which is a lot for one country. But the second country with books on this list in regard to popularity is Japan with 12. And then we have Argentina with 7. So it's not like so if you sort of look at the countries with most books, we are finding them a bit sort of all over the place. So the reason why Europe is so dominating is that, unlike Asia, Africa, and America, where mostly one country is producing the books that is translated, in Asia, it's mostly Japan, with South Korea having 3 books, Israel, Taiwan, and Iranian. And then for the Americas, we have Argentina with 7. Mexico has 3, Chile has 3, Brazil has 2, and then Uruguay and Dominican has 1 book each. And in Africa, it's very divided between Egypt having 2, Equatorial Guinea, Senegal, and Mauritanian. While when it came to Europe, 20 different countries are represented, but mostly with 1 book here and 1 book there and 1 book there. So I think what we need to do to read more diversely is to read outside of sort of our go-to countries, which are Japan and Argentina, and try to figure out if other countries have interesting books that can be fun to read. I'm especially surprised that there were no Chinese books on the list. But that can again say something about China's position in 2019. they hadn't started exporting so much Chinese culture. Probably, I don't really know. I was just surprised that, for example, we don't have anything from China. I wasn't really surprised that India wasn't represented because most women authors from India are publishing in English. But the fact that Japan is so dominating, that did surprise me before I started working on the list. And I was very surprised, which sort of shows my ignorance, that Argentina has such a wonderful literary culture, that there are so many authors producing in Argentina. And I actually saw that there were some authors that had chosen to move to Argentina, which might say something about Argentina and how much they are sort of helping you create literature. So I was not really surprised about Europe. I was a bit surprised about the countries, in a sense. I was also assuming that there would be more duplicates. So I was assuming that there would be more authors that were just dominating the list, because that's quite common when one author has one of her books being popular. They will translate a lot of her other books because they know, well, people know this name, they like this name. They will probably like everything else she has produced. So the fact that there were just 11 authors who had more than one book on the list, and all of them just 2, was to me quite interesting. So there were no one with, for example, I would assume that especially Tove Jansson would probably have more books. Elena Ferrante, I assumed, would have more books, especially considering that she is known for a quartet. But we only have her first book on this list, in addition to another book that she wrote. And we all only have 2 of Hong Kong's books. This is, of course, the list was from 2019. So this is way before Hong Kong won the Nobel Prize. Then we go on to genre. Again, not really surprising, with 67 of the books being literary. So 67 is what we would call literary high art, in a sense. 9 books I placed as horror, and most of them are from South America. Again, I've been sleeping on South American horror authors. Shame on me. 7 other books are non-fiction. What I placed as non-fiction, some would probably argue that some of the books probably should have been counted as non-fiction. But I tried to be, no, non-fiction means only non-fiction. Speculative, sort of science fiction, fantasy, all that good stuff. 6 books. And I don't know if that's a lot or not. Because I wasn't really prepared for almost any speculative literature. It's kind of sad topic, the fact that so little genre literature for example, speculative literature is translated. Hardly any is translated. So the fact that a total of 6 books have been translated is wonderful. And 2 of them are actually geared towards middle grade, sort of young teenagers. 4 of the books are thrillers. 3 of the books are poetries. This again also surprised me a bit because poetry, I'm doing a lot of projects around reading around the world. And when sort of I try to look into different cultures, I do find that poetry, especially among female authors, is quite large. So the fact that there are only 3 poetry books can say something about how poetry isn't very popular in the English-speaking world, which is sad because it can be considered quite popular in other cultures. Then I had 2 essay collections. I don't know. It's because it's Flight by Olga Tokarczuk and it's Fox by I can't remember her name. But those 2 books, which is just it's text. It's not really. There's a thematic go through, but there isn't really much connecting them. But they're not really classical essays, so I just call them essays. And then, of course, we have 2, which are just defined as absurdist satire. And the reason why I wanted to highlight those 2 in its own genre is because when I refer to the books as literary, I am talking about books that are considered probably high art, that talk about serious topics in a somewhat serious way. Now, they don't always talk about the same serious topics, and they don't necessarily talk about the same topics in the same way. For example, there are 2 books on the list that both deal with women who are abandoned by their husband and dealing with them in quite different ways. So that is Elena Ferrante, The Days of Abandonment, Territorial Light by Yuko Tsushima. So both of them are talking about the same topic. How do women deal with being abandoned by their husband and suddenly being only mothers? And Elena Ferrante has someone who goes externally, has someone who screams out her pain, while Yuko Tsushima is someone who goes internally, someone who is almost collapsing and imploding. So you have exploding and imploding. So that is 2 very different ways of talking about the same topic, but both are talking about it in a serious way. While the books that I sort of deemed as absurdist satire has taken, they're serious, of course, but it's not an everyday story. It's not a normal story. They've taken something different into it. And that's why I chose to separate them in the way. And I think maybe that also is, if I'm going to talk about what are the larger themes that are going through this list. A lot of them are serious books. They're talking about serious stuff. There were fewer of the books that talked about being a woman with the capital W than I thought. I thought that maybe people would be drawn to books by women who was specifically talking about being a woman. But actually, the majority of books talked about human stuff rather than women's stuff. You do have some books talking about women's stuff, of course, but a lot of the books are just talking about human stuff, but sometimes from a female perspective. And the things, for example, that I see that a lot of the female authors bring to the table can be illustrated by Svetlana Alkevich's book, The Female Face of War, where she has interviewed soldiers, female soldiers that fought during the Second World War. And one of the things that she tried to do, it wasn't just here are the stories, here are the voices, but she was highlighting the bodies. She was highlighting how the bodies were impacted by what was happening, not just by, well, what you do if you're menstruating and you're middle in a war zone, but how do you deal with the pain of losing limbs? How do you deal with seeing bodies that have been exploded? And she also talks a lot about wanting to talk about the emotions, wanting to talk about the feelings of loss. She didn't want to tell a hero story. And that is also one of the things that I recognized throughout a lot of the books. The stories would focus on relationships, the stories focusing on the body, the stories focusing on the emotions, the stories focusing on how do we just get on when we are no longer the hero of our own stories. And not just the female ones, so not just the female body, not just the female emotions, not just the fact that sometimes women can't be heroes in their own stories. This is just on a very general human level. She also talks, the authors also talk about male perspective here, how men are turned into men, the body of men, the emotions of men. And some of the authors were writing as if they were men, because some female authors do that. But that is general, my sort of feelings from the list. If you know any genre books written by women in translation, I apologize that my husband is coughing in the background. I'm going to wrap it up so I can go and check on him. But if you know any genre authors written by women in translation, please let me know, because I think that we need to highlight more genre authors. We need to lift them up, because there is something very interesting, especially regarding the speculative books that I've read, where I do think that women can give it a special kind of flair. So, what are your favorite books by women in translation? Have you read any of the books on the list? Let me know. And thank you for listening to me screaming into the void.